right, we can begin.
Thank you, Armin. This is Dr. Barbara Endicott-Popovsky at the University of Washington. I'm the academic director of the Master of Infrastructure Planning and Management at the Department of Urban Planning in the School of Built Environment. This is the first of our 2015 webinar series, and I'm very proud to present a longtime colleague and very good friend of mine, Dr. Patricia DeMarco, who has had a remarkable career. I'm not going to do it justice, so Patty, I'm going to ask you to add things if I miss something. But in the most recent years, I've known Patty in her role in academia, where she was involved with the University of Alaska, Anchorage, and then later Chatham College as the head of the Rachel Carson Center. Certainly her commitment to the environment and to ecology has been lifelong, and the work that she's done with the Rachel Carson Center and then later on her own with various consulting projects, and now with this movie coming up. Patty is now a producer of a film that is getting wide distribution in the documentary film market, and she's also the author of a book on the subject of Rachel Carson as well. So given that our infrastructure planning and management program has a deep commitment to the issues surrounding our environment, it's a pleasure to have Patty here, and she will be interviewed by Jill Ferris, who is a member of our faculty, the Master of Infrastructure Planning and Management, and who has a class that she teaches in the program on the issues of climate change. So Patty, would you like to add to my introduction anything?
Well, only that I was trained as a geneticist and have found my field in energy and environmental policy enlightened by the scientific process. I find that the kinds of issues that we're facing today really very much need the intersection between academic pursuits and policymakers in the applied world. And I really welcome this opportunity to participate with you to help advance those kinds of ideas.
Thanks, Patty. And how about you, Jill? Do you want to add something to my introduction?
No, I think your introduction is just fine, and I think we should get started.
I'll turn the program over to you, Jill.
Okay. Patty, I'm intrigued, since you're the former director of the Rachel Carson Institute. It seems like, having looked at some of the materials about your book and now film, that you have built a lot of your work on Rachel Carson's work, and I'm curious if you had some thoughts about what Rachel Carson might tell us if she was around today about our ecology and environment issues and her particular focus on toxic chemicals.
Well, she was one of my heroes back in 1964, soon after her book came out. It was a present from my dad and kind of shaped my whole career in many ways. I think her concern really stems from two main principles. One is the reverence for life, all life, from the minor little creatures that are in the soil all the way to humans. And also her concern about being cautious, that the laws of nature are the ones that have been evolved over a billion years, and they are going to prevail. And we interfere with the natural drone at our peril. So I think given her understanding of the intricacies of the relationships of living creatures to each other, I think her level of alarm at things like rampant endocrine disruptors in our environment and massive releases of chemicals would have alarmed her tremendously. I think she would have been very concerned about climate change because of her deep understanding of the oceans, and she would have been very concerned about the endocrine disruptors as the byproducts of our modern age because of our understanding of living creatures as systems.
It sounds like Rachel Carson was really an originator of the terms we now call precautionary principles of not using these materials until we really know how they have and what effect they have.
I think that's very much the case. Her testimony to Congress really was very vehement in urging precaution and also looking for biological controls rather than chemical controls if the issue was pest management. The mode of the time was eradicate pesting, and she was really very concerned that that had unintended effects far beyond the targeted pests. And that's even true today. 98% of the pesticides that are applied hit on-target species. And so we end up with unintended consequences for things like pollinators who are not the targets of our pest management that who suffer from being affected by them.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to give you a chance to talk about your new book, which is also a film, it sounds like, or your film is based on that, so you can talk about that a little bit too. Your new book is Pathways to Our Sustainable Future, and in that you talk about 3 different major pathways that are important and having to do with fossil fuels, our monoculture, and endocrine-disrupting chemicals, which you've also mentioned briefly. Can you tell us a little bit more about each of those 3?
Certainly. I have been reading a lot of the things that come out, especially dealing with climate change, and it's so universally depressing. You get into these massive polemics about how we're going to be obliterating ourselves from the world because of, the accumulation of the effects. But I really think people only act out of a sense of hope and empowerment. And I wanted to give people some very concrete examples of things we're already doing right that can be a pathway forward. Now, a pathway starts as a few people doing things a little bit at a time, and then more and more people go that way, and that path becomes better worn. And a lot of our roadways, especially in the East Coast, initially were deer trails or rabbit trails. So we're looking at doing things that can be based on what is available today, but then expanded into mainstream production down the road very soon. One of those is the shift from burning fossil fuels for energy as our primary way of getting power. The current system was developed in the 1800s using the Rankine steam cycle, where you use the fuel to boil water to turn a turbine that then generates electricity. Only about a third of your fuel value is converted to saleable and usable electricity through this method, and the rest of it is lost as waste heat. And we also have tremendous CO2 emissions from reversing the sequestration of carbon in fossil bodies under the coal and under the oil and gas. If you go to a system of energy that is using renewable energy as the base, you have many, many more options. The solar energy that falls on us daily is 23,000 times in excess of our wildest projections of demand out to 2050. So it isn't that we don't have enough energy, it's that we haven't organized our economy to capture and use it. So that's one example. And certainly the prices coming down on a per watt basis for solar collectors has been a demonstration of the effectiveness of that. And places like Germany, where they're up to 35% of their total power system already, with more to come, in places that are even with less solar direct power than in Pittsburgh, I think you can see that these things would be effective. In terms of organic farming, one of the largest areas of our use of resources is in producing food by monoculture kinds of agriculture. And the problem with this is that the heavy dependence on chemicals for fertilizer and for pesticide and herbicide to manage large-scale plantings of monoculture crops where everything in the ground is the same year after year after year. It really depletes the soil, and it limits the variability from one place to another, and also the variability within the crop. So they're much more vulnerable to those diseases and to things like drought. So if you move to a more diversified agroecology, approach using organic practice, you end up restoring and rebuilding the fertility of the ground as you grow food. And I think there's been really exciting developments in this area. I just had a chance to hear Bill Allen last week, who has done a lot of urban agriculture in Milwaukee, creating on their asphalt in urban areas enough food to feed entire neighborhoods at a time. And he's looking for ways to scale that approach up. And I think that's the pathway that we need to be pursuing more, to look at ways to turn food production into a restorative practice for restoring fertile ground. And endocrine disruptors, we talked about a little bit. This is a really serious problem, partly because of the entrenched mechanisms of making things without regard for whether the products or byproducts are biologically active. What we need is to shift the focus to designing to control the hazard instead of designing to control the exposure. Our regulatory system puts corks in the smokestacks and stoppers in the emission pipes and liners in the landfills, and we still have 5.2 billion tons per year of toxic materials released into the atmosphere, into the ground, and into the water. And that is under permitted releases. So we need to address that by preventing the formation of all those toxic materials by design.
One of the, speaking of the toxic materials and production, one of the things you talk about in your book is what you titled dynamic equilibrium. And I was intrigued by that. It's talking about ways to convert our economy from a once-through conversion of raw materials to a reuse, repurpose, recycling. I mean, we hear the recycling term a lot, but something about this intrigued me of that you could, I assume you're talking also about waste products that then become inputs for other production. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. One example that would be familiar to you is aluminum. The aluminum industry operates at something like 85 or 90% reclaimed and repurposed materials because the refining of bauxite is so energy intensive and so expensive that it's worth it to recapture and reuse aluminum as it is produced. So that's one industry that has actually accomplished this kind of closed loop production cycle. Another that is really interesting is the growing market in recapturing electronics for repurposing and reuse. Now, a lot of people think, oh, I recycle my computer when we throw them out, but they end up in China in these huge heaps, and little children go through them pulling out the metals and so forth and refining them on small Bunsen burners and getting, badly contaminated. But there are companies now emerging that repurpose and revamp and return to use sophisticated electronic equipment. And what this dynamic equilibrium kind of concept is, not so much that you try to recycle everything, although that is one thing you definitely need to do, but rather to design things to be reclaimed and recycled and repurposed. So that, for example, if you're making carpet, you would sell it in little squares. As one section becomes worn, you pull that section up, send it back to the factory to be repurposed into something else, and they send you a new square, rather than ripping out all the carpet and replacing it. Another kind of a concept is to actually take products that are otherwise thrown away and turn them into some other kind of product. So, for example, you can make fibers and fabrics out of discarded plastic rather than start from scratch. You can also take a lot of things like paper products are recycled and refined until you're finally down to almost nothing. There are a lot of, a whole back end of the economic cycle that is based on repurposing, reclaiming, and reusing materials. But you do it by design from the beginning. One company that does this is a furniture design. So you design to have things reupholstered and repurposed rather than thrown away into landfill.
So in some ways it seems like it's going back to concepts we maybe had 50 years ago. I think many of our parents did things like reupholster furniture, and now when we buy furniture from, I'm going to say IKEA, but there's lots of places like that, they're almost made to be destructible and not to be reused. Do you feel like some of these concepts are ones that we've had and kind of moved away from?
Well, I think in times when you were doing everything handmade and homemade, it was much more labor intensive and therefore expensive. So you treasured them and you didn't throw things away because it was difficult to replace them. You handed things down. I know I would hate to tell you how much of the stuff in my house was in my parents' house. Some of that was reclaimed from junk piles because my mother liked to refinish and reupholster furniture, and it's a skill. You know, it does take a different focus, but if everyone does their lifestyle the way we do in this country, where we depend a great deal on raw materials to trash, it would take 5.5 planets, and we have only one. So we need to become much more efficient about using resources in a way that is conserving of the resource, but also looking at what you pass down. And the concept of not needing so much quantity of material, but rather treasuring and taking better pride in workmanship of things that we do use. It's a totally different value system.
Absolutely. And one of the things you talk about that seems to connect to that is that you have, you call it the gifts of the living earth.
Yes.
And that kind of maybe helping people understand what ecosystems we depend upon for life so that we value those more. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, if that comes at the very beginning of the book.
It does. I've kind of circled back.
It's really important that people understand that the things that we depend on for our life support, the air, the water, the fertile ground, and the biodiversity of other species that we coexist with and depend on, we do not pay for. The way our economy is organized, if you look at the formula for the gross domestic product, that is what we use as our measure of success and our measure of well-being, they don't reflect the value of the clean air. You can use air and water in an industrial process, and you don't pay for it until you pay for waste treatment service, if you do at all. And we have not learned to value those things that are priceless, really, for our survival. And I'm not saying that we should put a value on them in terms of making them monetized, but to recognize that when we do things sort of like the tragedy of the commons written on a global scale, you know, we are not taking responsibility for custody and restoration of the air and the water and the ground. And our intensity of use of those things has now reached such a proportion that we are actually having an effect on the composition of the atmosphere and the water and the ground as a species. And we need to begin to recognize that and begin to redress those harms. I know in our neighborhood here in Pittsburgh, there was the restoration of a watershed that had been flowing under a place where the slag heat from steel mills had been dumped into the creek for years and years. And with a great deal of public effort and the cooperation of 2 universities, they restored 3 miles of 9 Mile Run stream back to a functioning wetland. And that cost $11 million.
Mm.
So, and there are 3,000 miles of acid mine drainage damaged streams in Pennsylvania alone. And so if you think about what it would cost to restore them all to functioning watersheds, you know, it just becomes an astronomical amount of restoration money. But preventing those kinds of damages from expanding into the future is something we can definitely do. And the earth does heal, but we have to help.
Absolutely. That provides a good example. As we have a few more minutes left here, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the institutional barriers that prevent us from moving into this kind of sustainable future.
Well, I think the largest one that we've found has been the difficulty in changing public attitudes and public perceptions. You can follow the survey services of things like the Yale Climate Project or Pew Research Center and see that public opinion does not react very well to new information, especially when the mainstream media are completely controlled by one side or another with a great deal more commercial message. Education about the complexities of our living systems is much more difficult to convey to people in a way that allows them to change their behavior and understand that they can do something. I find that a lot of people become overwhelmed with despair and feel that these problems are so overwhelming and so complicated and so beyond coping that best to just close your eyes and pretend it isn't even happening, because that you can deal with. It's a form of just coping. But really, every little bit does help. And if everyone does a little bit, it makes a big difference. So if you think about it, if everyone just stopped throwing away plastic bags, you could reduce each person, if you just reduce 1 pound of plastic bags a month, you would have a tremendous impact on the net result.
That's a great message, because I know teaching the climate change topic, I get a lot of that sense of that's just too overwhelming, and so why bother kind of thing. My one little effort doesn't matter, and it's hard to help students feel like they can make a difference. And so this is great.
One thing that we did at Chatham was they did eliminate the use of plastic water bottles on campus, and every freshman was given a reusable water bottle, and they installed water dispensers for hot and cold water in all the buildings and on multiple floors of buildings that had multiple floors. And it really does make a difference. And at the end of the year, they added up and reported how much plastic had been saved based on the amount of water dispensed. And students received, the reinforcement of that. Also, there's energy embedded in everything you use and everything you eat. And if you have students do a profile of their own personal energy footprint and then find ways to reduce that themselves, and then you add it up around a whole class, you can see and measure even within the course of the semester how much impact you can have with food.
That's a great idea. As we wrap up here, why don't you tell us a little bit about your film and how is that based directly on the book, or does it have a different focus? And how did it come about?
We had a conference for celebrating Silent Spring at 50 in 2012. And we had 33 speakers at that conference. It went on for 2 days. And some of the people that we pulled together there were really special people that we interviewed in more depth. And after the end of the conference, and after I had left Chatham, actually, it turned out that there was a really good friend of mine who filmed the event, Mark Dixon. He said to me, Patty, this needs to be in a documentary. We shouldn't just leave it in a can here. And we pulled together a little bit of money and were able to do a documentary based on the interviews that we had done with Rachel Carson's son, Roger Christie, and her biographer, Linda Lear, Mark Madison, the historian and archivist at the Fish and Wildlife Service, who actually has the position that Rachel Carson initially had, and a number of the scientists and writers who participated in the conference. And then we pulled it together with some music, some quotes from her writing, and some additional material that I added in order to piece it as a storyline. And it became a documentary film. We premiered it in December, and it has had a number of screenings at film festivals. We've been invited to present at a number of conferences and film festivals later this year. And it is available online. You can buy it through your library. And we're getting a great deal of positive feedback. And the main thing is to show how one person can in fact make a difference one other person, you can actually have a tremendous effect on the outcome.
That's great. That's a great message, and I'm going to track down this video and I'd probably try to work it into my course this quarter. It sounds like something that is very pertinent to my class and to our students in general in the IPM program.
Well, thank you. It is available online. You can go to my website and find out how to order it. And we're working on a discussion guide now to go with it, because we've had a lot of invitations for us to come speak to people when they show the film, and that always involves moving a community from awareness to action. So hopefully that will be something that will be available for other people to use as well.
That's terrific. I appreciate that. Barbara, I want to turn it back to you for any closing comments or questions that you might want to add to the mix here.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Patty for joining us today, because it was very interesting to hear about the book and to hear about the film. I really think that the subject matter of both, as you said, Jill, align with the course that you teach and are in line with the spirit of the program. And so hopefully anybody that is listening online or hears this message will get a sense that these kinds of topics are what we emphasize in our program. And so I really appreciate Patty taking time, and I really appreciate you, Jill, being involved with the design of our conversation, because I know that your knowledge of this area is profound and contributed to drawing out the key points that I think our students need to hear. What I'd like to do is thank both of you again for coming, and for those of you that are online, this concludes our session. Patty, I'll make one comment. As you spoke about conservation of things, it reminded me of our Pennsylvania roots with the Amish, and I can remember how they recycle just about everything. Tin cans were put together, and they make footstools. I mean, I can go down the list. So there have been people. Yes. So there have been societies that I think that have coped with this in the past, and I think that your model for going forward and changing our concepts is a good one. So I'll say thank you once again, and if no one has any other questions or comments, I'll pause for just a minute and see. Does anybody have comments or questions? If not, I'll excuse people from our seminar and then take a few minutes at the end for anybody that would be interested in hearing about our master's degree.
I just want to say that, people should be encouraged that our problems are not in need of a new technology, they're in need of a new value system. And I think we have many, many lessons to learn from people, ranging from indigenous peoples to our ancestors, about living more lightly on the earth. And that can be a really robust and wonderful existence. This is not a system of deprivation, but a situation of abundance.
Well, thank you, Patty. I think those are words of wisdom. And again, I think that people who come to our program share that point of view, as do all of us that are online with you. So let me
so much for having me.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patty. And why don't I segue now to a discussion about our degree program?
Barbara, this is Armin here. I just wanted to let you know that at this point we are at 12:30. I do have some information on the screen for links about the program if anyone would be interested in viewing those at their own time, as well as information on Patty DeMarco's website if they'd like to find out more information about her and her work.
Yeah, I think that's good, Armin. I think we want to refer our students to your book and also to the schedule of the film, so that if they happen to be living in an area where the documentary is scheduled, they can take advantage of the viewing. So let's talk a little bit about our master's degree. The Master of Infrastructure Planning and Management is entirely online, and we have, as you just experienced, a wealth of good instructors and a good community that we draw on to deliver to students some of the latest ideas in how to build, manage, and deal with our infrastructure that's aging, that's out of date, that's being challenged by interconnectedness through the internet. And so this curriculum has been put together by a group of faculty at the Urban Planning Department. And we provide part of an urban planning degree, so people end up with tools that are useful to planners. We study finance, we study finance of public institutions, we study GIS, we study epidemiology, giving people the tools that they need to really assess and manage infrastructure, but we also provide people exposure to 6 critical infrastructures. You get introduced at the beginning of the program to a summary of all 6, and as you go through the program, you have opportunities to select projects and papers and research activities that conform to one of these 6 infrastructures, if you like, because in the second year we dive deeply into them, and we look at energy, we look at the communications internet infrastructure, we look at public health, we look at food, we look at water, and we look at transportation. And those are infrastructure systems that are essential for the health of a community, and they also are systems that we understand well at the University of Washington. Public health is one of our world-class programs on campus. We're known for our work in medicine and public health, and certainly transportation is something that we specialize in here at the university. We're close to the Boeing company and some of those influences. So you will be exposed to ideas about all of those 6 infrastructures and how they need to be supported, upgraded, updated, and brought into the 21st century, which will be the challenge of this next generation. And I think we've read quite a bit about the need for investment in infrastructure. We prepare people for having those conversations in urban planning environments. Our students who've graduated have gone on to do careers in emergency management. They've also been involved with careers in the public sector. We have students who go to work for local and county governments, as well as the federal government. We're just beginning to see employers understand the need to understand their posture related to infrastructure. So it's not just the public sector that hires folks like ours. We also have interest from the private sector that know they have to really do disaster recovery and continuity planning. So with this, I will turn things over to Karen and Armin, who can talk about the logistics of the program.
This is Karen Fischler. I'm the program coordinator for the Master of Infrastructure Planning Management. And when people who are interested in applying have questions about the application process or any other sort of nuts and bolts of applying, they can, and how the program works, they can contact me. And when you go to our website, you'll find contact information to reach out to me. I'd be delighted to hear from anybody who's interested.
Thank you. This is Armin Dykorn. I work as the administrator and program manager for the program from UW PCE. The program itself can be located on the web, and I'm going to provide that information here as soon as my web browser writes itself at www.infrastructure/management.uw.edu, and I will share that website. It can also be found just by going online and searching MIPM at the UW website. just go to www.washington.edu, and then here's the actual website for it that I'm sharing. And as you can see, infrastructuremanagement.uw.edu, and that's a great place to find out more information about the program. And as you can see, it's a great place to get connected and get updates. We do have contact information on that site, and Karen Fischler's information is located here. And also on the Stay Connected side here, you can add some information to receive emails about program updates. So at this time, if there's any questions, we'd be happy to address them. If not, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. I do want to thank everyone for your attendance today. It was definitely an informative discussion, and I thank everyone's efforts for contributing.
Thank you, Armand, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye, all.
Goodbye. At this point, we'll turn off the recording, and